You know me, Caesar Bakes, Rick Clementine, 7 Hard Shogun represent, and this, well, this is an RX 480 RS. Exaggerated hand movements. So, one thing I have noticed about this card, I keep this in pretty much what I consider to be like my work computer. And right now, I have the BIOS in the performance setting. Two settings here, performance and silent. And I notice this thing really likes to idle at around 60 degrees Celsius. And for me, that's a little bit high. Now, I've noticed a couple things about this card. Sometimes, this is one of the ones that is, I believe it's called the hard swap option or something like that, where you can just pull the fans out and remove them. You really have to make sure that these fans are snapped in all the way and that you got good contact with those pins down there. Otherwise, the fans will not work. You'll have one of them running, but the other one won't run. I've actually had it before where it wasn't snapped in all the way and the one fan lit up, but it didn't run. So that is something you do have to watch with these cards. Now, there is one thing that does kind of concern me with this thing. When I was taking a look at it, and I was looking down in here, behind this backplate area right here, and I found that this backplate seems to be entirely cosmetic. At first when I saw it, I thought it would be like the, if you remember, or maybe you don't, back in the day on something like the 5870 2GB, I believe it was the iFinity edition, the one that had the 6 mini display ports on the front of it along this side. The backplate on that card actually made contact with the RAM that was on the back of the card and the other side of the VRMs. And that backplate served to pretty much cool it. It helped to pull some of the heat off of it. But this one doesn't really seem to do much of anything. And I think personally that it might actually inhibit cooling a little bit more than it helps it, because I have noticed on several occasions where I've reached my hand inside of the case while I was using it to I was doing several things at once. Basically, I was watching a movie on one screen with the audio output running to that. I was editing a video, well, editing, and I had a web page open, and generally with this thing I use anywhere between 3 to 5 heads on it. So that's why I keep it in performance mode, because it is kind of taxing on the card. And while I was doing that, I stopped for a while, let it rest for about like half an hour or so, and I noticed it was still hovering at around 60 degrees. And I put my hand on the back of it, you know, just touched it and everything, and I noticed the backplate got pretty hot. So I do have to wonder if the backplate on this thing doesn't actually inhibit the cooling instead of help it. And again, there's nothing that's attached to it. There's no thermal pads on the back here or nothing like that. So I'm thinking it's probably entirely cosmetic. And don't get me wrong, it's a nice looking backplate, but it really makes me wonder how efficient it is, and if it does more harm than good, let's say. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. The reason why I'm here today is because I was doing a little bit more reading about this card, and I had read from a couple different places that there was a run of them that the heat paste that they put on here wasn't too good. The TIM, thermal interface material, the compound, the heat paste, the schmutza, the stupa, whatever you want to call it. So what I'm going to be doing here today is I'm going to be replacing the heat paste on this thing. Thermal paste, heat paste, TIM, whatever you want to call it. From here on out, let's just refer to it as the schmutza. Going to be replacing the schmutza. Now, obviously if you do this, you're going to void your warranty on the card. So if you filled out the warranty, then I wouldn't recommend doing this. But if you didn't fill out the warranty or you got the card secondhand, then Best of luck to you with this. You know what? I didn't fill out the warranty on this one. Let's just, there we go. Let's just break the warranty seal on it. Now, there isn't much holding this particular heatsink on. It's only got 6 screws in it. And when I undo this, it should pretty much come right off. Yeah, that's, if you take a look at this heat paste on here. Oh boy. Oh boy. Got a little X's on there. That's nice. That's nice. I like that. I like that. Are you excited? I'm excited. It is still pretty gooey, but I have to say that in terms of the spreading, it was kind of a crappy job that was done by factory. Now, as I'm taking a look at this thing here, I'm noticing that there wasn't any type of heatsink on the RAM modules. There was definitely a heatsink over here on the VRMs, the MOSFETs, whatever you want to call them. I'm probably calling that the wrong thing, so thumbs down to this video. That's it. Hey, I mean it. But anyway, so what we're going to do here is originally when I was thinking about it, I had thought to myself, well, you know what, I might want to replace this thermal pad right here for something that's a little bit more efficient, maybe one of the Alpha Cool ones that I got laying around. This one, judging by the thickness, looks like it's going to be about like 1.5 millimeter or maybe even a 1 millimeter. So I do have a couple of those. I got some Alpha Cool ones laying around here, and they're pretty good. Definitely more efficient than that, and that will actually help to pull some of the heat off of the card. Slide that back down there. That'll help to pull some of the heat off the card. It'll help to get some of the heat out of this area right here, and it'll help to bring it into the actual heatsink itself and hopefully improve cooling a little bit. Now, as far as this backplate goes, I think I'm going to pull this backplate off. Now, as you can see, the only way to remove this backplate is from the screws that are sitting behind the actual heatsink. So I do want to pull this plate off, and I just want to check to make sure that there isn't really anything that's connected to this. I don't think that there is, but it's always good just to be thorough. It'll only take a minute. There's probably a video of someone else doing this somewhere that I really should have checked for ahead of time. Have to excuse me, I am recording with a little bit different setup than what I normally am. Yep. This backplate is purely cosmetic. Now, this heatsink is not all that heavy, so in theory, if you wanted to, you could just remove the backplate from this thing and see where that gets you in terms of temperature, which I might actually do that a little bit later on. But I also have other stuff that I was thinking about here too. I am going to be taking a measurement of this area right here and the space between these two. Oh geez, guess I showed you guys that, huh? I am going to be taking a measurement of this area right here and the space between these two bolt holes, because I want to put this thing on water, but I noticed that they don't make a water block for this particular model. And one thing that it showed is that the other water blocks for the other RX 480s, they all seem to interfere and they hit this piece right here. Now, I do know that they have the 580 out now, and from what I was reading, the 580 is pretty much a direct flash to this card, or at least someone on the forums had done that. And so maybe if they come up with an RX 580 water block, it'll fit properly, this, that, and the third. But for now, I think I'm just going to take the measurement from here to here, see what I can find on a couple different websites, and more than likely just get another piece, basically put a water block on here, put just like a universal style GPU block on here. Since there wasn't already a heatsink on the RAM, I could probably just get away with using like some of the small heat spreaders and everything else, putting those around here, and pretty much calling it a day. Now, let's go get a couple things, and then we're going to clean up this video card and see where that gets us. Alright, now as you can see, I have got quite a mess going on in here. So I'm going to use this guy right here, which is a pretty much a schmutz spreader, to get majority of this stuff off of here. Well, I should say to get off as much as I possibly can, because this is just all over the place. Notice that it already seems to be getting kind of hard and crusty, so that's no good. One thing I did notice when I was looking at the actual heatsink itself, when I ran my finger over the surface really isn't quite as smooth as what it could be. And that right there, that will actually affect cooling a little bit. Now, it's not going to make a huge difference, mind you, but it will make a difference. That's part of the reason why people tend to lape the top of their heat sinks. That, and sometimes the heat sinks get warped, the lids get warped. So what they do is they lape it down to make sure that it is pretty much 100% level and flush, and you get a little bit better contact that way. On top of that too, you don't want to have very much grain on your heatsink either, because if you do, that can actually inhibit thermal transfer. That's why things like Arctic Silver years ago was so popular, was because the heatsinks all used to be quite grainy, and the Arctic Silver would kind of work its way into the grains, and it would help to create a really, really nice thermal medium. Now, what I'm doing right here is I'm just using a tissue. The reason why I'm using a tissue is because whenever I do this, I like using something that is very, very soft to clean these things. Because a tissue will rip before you actually pull one of these little diddly doodles off the GPU. Yes, I just called it a diddly doodle. Worst thing you can do is lose a diddly doodle. I've had to replace those before. Anything that's a surface mount diode is a bitch to replace. Well, if you're an old fart like me, that is. Now, here comes the point where I'm going to get thoroughly flamed if I haven't been already. It's alright, I'm used to it. I don't use rubbing alcohol or anything like that to clean the tops of CPUs. CPUs, GPUs, nothing like that for the heat sinks. What I use personally is I actually use 409 to do this. And I know I heard a couple of you cringe already. My ears are probably ringing right now. And the reason why I do this is because years ago I found that this gave me the best results. I used to use the acetone, the rubbing alcohol. I tried those prep pads and everything else, and nothing really seemed to clean it up quite like 409 did. But if you're going to do this, you're going to have to do it very carefully, and please, for the love of God, do not just spray it directly on top of the chip. Spray it onto a tissue or another very, very soft medium that you don't really have to worry about ripping any of the SMDs off this thing here. And just spray it on there and just very carefully just wipe it off, because all you really want to do is you just want to clean up this area right here. You want to try and get as much of that stuff out of this area as possible. You really only want to have the thermal paste just on the very top of the chip. That's it. When I say spray it on, I don't mean spray it onto the rag. You just want to drip a very little bit of it onto it here. And then just go slow, right like this. And just carefully, very carefully, but you want to get all that discoloration from the thermal paste out of there. If you got any little chunks or anything like that, that's where you would use the paste spreader to try and dig them out of there without harming any of these little components that are on here. And again, as you can see, occasionally a piece of tissue will kind of fall off in there, but that's why you have a couple extras with you. Now, you never want to go hard over top of one of these things, over top of one of these chips, because you don't want to scar up the top of it. Just want to go around the outside like that. Get that cleaned up. Looks like I got a little piece there that's going to be stubborn. Like that. Go in between here. Make sure there's nothing stuck in there. Alright, now that's clean. Now let's move over to the heatsink real quick. Now, if you'll notice, when you run your finger on top of this copper pad right here, which is what makes contact with the heat pipes, it's not super rough, but it is a little bit rough. You can see there's a little bit of scarring along here, and that really comes down to quality control. I mean, obviously this isn't like a flagship video card or anything like that, so you're not going to expect the same quality in something like this that you would if you had bought like a 290X back in the day, or a Pro Duo or something like that. As you can see, I'm just wiping that off right there. You can see there's still some residue in there, but you want to get all that residue cleaned off of there. You want to have two completely smooth surfaces. They both need to be as clean as possible before you try and mate them back together with the thermal paste. And again, like I said, I'm spraying it onto the tissue. With this, you can be a little bit more liberal with the way that you spray it on there. And by liberal, I mean you can put a little bit more of it on there. Now, I have actually laped GPU heat sinks in the past. I'm not going to do it for this one, but I have done it in the past. Again, a lot of this stuff with the thermal paste just really comes down to a few quality control issues with XFX. Now I'm going to go grab a caliper, going to measure the card up, and I'm going to see, not right now, but later on, I'm going to see if I can find something to make up a nice little water block for this guy. Now the first thing I want to do here is I want to get a measurement of just this section right here. So looking at about 20 millimeters. By about roughly 55 is the surface area. From bolt center to bolt center, we're looking at right at around 75. So I should be able to find a plate somewhere that I can make something work with that, if need be. I don't really plan on getting rid of this card for a while, so might be my best option. Now what I am going to do here is I'm going to pry this guy up. I've got a lot nicer thermal pad I want to put on here, and actually came off of an Alpha Cool kit for some RAM. Now some of you might be wondering, what's the point of changing this around? And the simple answer is that what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to pull as much heat off the board, notice my nice cut, as possible. And the way that I'm doing that is by trying to get as much heat off of these VRMs as possible. Now, if you actually take a look here at the way these heat pipes are arranged, looks like there's only 3 heat pipes on this thing. And if you look at the spacing between where the heatsink is for the VRMs and the heat pipe right here, you've got a good 1 to 2 inches of space right in here. Which means that this section over here, just this very section of the heatsink, was pretty much designed to pull heat off of there and not really interfere too much with what's going on with the CPU heatsink. Now, it does have a fan pretty much blowing directly on top of it, so in theory, if I get more heat off of those and bring it into the heatsink, it should be able to keep the static temperature of the car just a little bit cooler. Is it actually going to work in practice? Well, I don't know just yet. We'll find out though. Now, on to the fun part. What I'm going to be doing here is, oops. Hey man, it happened. Anyway, what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be applying some Phobia Nano Grease onto this chip right here. Now, this is something that I've disagreed with people a lot on, and just my preferred method, this is the way that I've done it for a long time, very long time, is to use the spread method and not necessarily the P method. Depending on who you talk to, there's a lot of debate as to which way is better. For me, I just happen to find the spread method to be a little bit more efficient, and sometimes with the P method, if you remember the way that this thing looked when we started, that's what can happen if you put too much of it on. It just kind of goes over the sides and globs all over the place and just makes a big mess. So I'm going to be doing the spread method. Now, an important thing to note when you are doing the spread method is that you have to be kind of careful when you do this, especially when you're using stuff like this, which is quite a bit thicker than most other thermal pastes out there. I mean, it still spreads pretty nicely, but like if you see the way that I'm lifting and everything, you have to be careful that you don't create air pockets underneath what you're spreading. Now, I probably could have gone a little bit heavier on this than what I did, but this should actually be quite alright. Now, when you get a nice spread going on here, you just want to kind of finish spreading it out as much as possible, and you want to bring it just about completely to the edge if you can. This method takes a lot more practice to do, and to be fair, this isn't one of my nicer ones so far. Just take this around the sides like that. A little bit of residue up. Just fill that little corner in. Now, it's not quite as smooth as what I normally like to get, but it should be enough to do the job. Now, for this, I am going to be putting the back plate on it, just because I want to see well, I guess it would help if I used the right screws. I'm putting the back plate back on this card primarily because I want to see just how much the thermal paste makes a difference before I remove it. If I remove the back plate now and temperature falls a huge amount, I'm not going to know if it was just because of the back plate or if it was just because of the thermal paste. If I do it like this, it'll give me a little bit better idea as to where I'm going from here with it. Alright, got the back plate back on now. And now, because this thermal pad isn't really pressed in at all, when I reassemble this, I am going to be doing it somewhat upside down. Because I really don't want that thermal pad to move. And in actuality, it might not have been a bad idea to have just taken the thermal pad and placed it right over top of there. But this way works fine too, I hope. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to line up these holes. going to start with these two over here. And I just want to get these to the point where it's just a real little bit snug. I don't really want to torque these guys down too much. And that should be enough to keep that guy in place. Now, whenever I reinstall a heatsink, I like to get all 4 screws just started, and then when I tighten it up, I always go in a cross pattern. So when I tighten it up, I'll go like this, 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 to this. And the reason for doing that is because whenever you tighten anything or whenever you torque anything down, you always go in a cross pattern. That way you don't get it kind of bulging on one side or anything like that. It helps to pretty much distribute the load and distribute the weight, distribute the pressure equally across whatever it is you're tightening up. Anytime you're dealing with an engine, unless it says otherwise, this is the way you always tighten everything up, and that tends to follow over in other parts of life as well, like tightening up screws on a video card. Now again, you don't want to go too tight with this. You just want to get to the point where it's just a real little bit snug. And I don't know if you noticed or not, but I got a little bit of thermal paste back here on the back of the card, on the cover. So I just want to clean some of that off of there. Now I'm going to put this guy back in the system, and I'm going to run a stress test on it, and I'm going to see where the temperatures are after the stress test.